This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager podcast. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. It's March 6th, 2025, and across the TV and radio stations that work on the same model as ours, this is Protect Public Media Day. It's a national day of action to take a stand and tell Congress that independent, audience-supported journalism is important. Your support, your voice, is vital at a time when funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is at risk. I talked about that in a recent episode, and I'm not going to hash it all out again. But I do invite you to listen to the rest of this episode, the rundown of the day's news, a story that dives in deeper, and then tell the powers that be that coverage like this is worthwhile. Now, I always like to dig into history to find the context, and sure enough, this kind of thing has happened before. Back in 1969, President Nixon wanted to slash public broadcasting funding by half. One of my heroes, Fred Rogers, spoke at a Senate hearing, answering questions from lawmakers who seemed pretty skeptical that public media served a real purpose. He talked about his children's television show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He pointed out that the budget for a full episode of his thoughtful programming that carefully considered and respected his audience cost less than 2 minutes of the bombastic animated cartoons that were available elsewhere. He changed the senators' minds as he talked about the importance of treating children humanely and sensibly, not just as young consumers. Now, we don't make children's television at WPLN News, but the underlying ethos is the same. And I think that idea forms a through line in public broadcasting. At local stations and national networks alike, we place a high value on treating you, our audience, as smart, curious, and feeling people who deserve both respect and high-quality information and entertainment. CPB funding costs you as an individual $1 and change in tax money each year. About 40 cents of that goes to public radio. It returns much, much more to us all. And right now on our website, you can find out how easy it is to take a stand for public media on this day of action. In just a few minutes, we hear a little bit about the more strategic side of comedy. That's coming up after the newscast.
Thematic Static on WNXP is the mixtape we make together. A themed set loosely organized by you, the listener, handpicking songs according to a theme. Airing first Thursdays at 9 a.m. and again Saturdays at 9 a.m., Thematic Static plucks your requests from the socials at WNXP Nashville and by voice memo at 615-320-9100. Thematic Static, the mixtape we make together, supported by United Record Pressing, only on WNXP.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Dozens of immigrants and allies braved the cold weather yesterday to rally in favor of immigrant rights at the State House.
Say it loud, say it clear, immigrants are welcome here. Say it loud, say it clear, immigrants are welcome here.
It's an annual event organized by the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, or TIRC. This time around, the event is in response to a wave of anti-immigrant legislation from Tennessee lawmakers. The coalition's legal director, Judith Claire-June, told the crowd she thinks these laws are a distraction from other, more unpopular moves.
They hope that instead of noticing their failure to make it easier to put food on the table, we'll blame our neighbors for hardships. They hope that instead of calling them out for giving millions in kickbacks to wealthy corporations, we'll quietly allow them to take away our freedoms.
The group appeared at a Senate committee hearing yesterday. They opposed a bill that would allow Tennessee schools to refuse to teach students without legal status or charge their families tuition. WPLN's Miriam reports a new amendment would also require every school to verify the legal status of its students.
The legislation narrowly passed the Senate Education Committee 5-4 yesterday. If passed, the bill would challenge another 5-4 decision, Plyler v. Doe. the U.S. Supreme Court case that established the right to education for students regardless of immigration status. The bill's sponsor, Republican Bo Watson, says that some schools are overburdened by English language learners and that this measure is the answer to that financial dilemma.
And so the thinking would be, perhaps, that those who are here unlawfully, when they don't have this advantage here, will either return to where they came from or will find other means.
Memphis Democratic Senator Ramesh Akbari says that in the past, lawmakers have denied immigrant students in-state tuition at the college level.
And that broke my heart. But this is saying that babies, you start school at 5 years old, that you do not deserve to be educated.
After the bill cleared the Senate committee, hundreds of protesters decried the vote and chanted,
We'll be back! We'll be back!
Specifically, they'll be back next week when the bill heads to another committee vote. Mariana Bacallao, WPLN News.
Tennessee may soon become the first state to legally define gas as a renewable energy. The state passed a law 2 years ago defining the fossil fuel as clean energy. WPLN's Caroline Eggers reports that a new bill seeks to expand the definition to clean, green, and renewable.
Gas is neither clean or renewable by any standard definition. Natural gas is a fracked fossil fuel, mostly composed of methane. It currently accounts for nearly 40% of the nation's climate pollution from fuel burning, roughly double that of coal. But this new bill wants the state to consider it renewable, a term usually reserved for sources like wind and solar. Representative Clark Boyd sponsored the bill. The Republican from Lebanon provided a summary in a hearing last week.
A few years ago in Tennessee, we created a clean list of clean energies and a list of renewable energies. And a lot of folks thought that just needed to be combined into one list.
The first such legislation, passed in Ohio, was crafted by two dark money groups with ties to the gas industry, including the American Legislative Exchange Council. The intent seems to be blocking local climate action, which often targets gas. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
Nashville's Metro Council is moving forward with enacting restrictions or guardrails on how police surveillance technology can be used. The bill was approved on second reading this week. It is closely connected to the hotly debated Fusus technology, which would allow police to access footage from private property owners. Council members rejected implementing Fusus last year. One council member, however, floated deferring the so-called guardrails until the council could see another contract from Fusus. But the bill's sponsor, Rollin Horton, pushed for approval now.
I appreciate the spirit behind the need for deferral so we can consider what's a potential actual Fusus contract. However, we've already actually considered a Fusus contract extensively and rejected it 3 months ago now, I think. That was the basis that this was prepared on an actual live Fusus contract, not a hypothetical one.
Nashville's mayor has said that if the rules are implemented, he would consider bringing the Fusus contract back before the council. The council ended up advancing the measure after adding amendments. Those include restrictions on how surveillance technology can be used in apartment complexes, plus a requirement that footage of an officer using unlawful force be sent to the DA and Office of Professional Accountability. The bill will be up for final consideration on March 18th. An effort to encourage the private sector to build and preserve affordable housing units in the next decade is moving closer to reality. The Catalyst Fund is a public-private partnership to construct 3,000 housing units across the city. As of this week, the fund has attracted $76 million in capital. The fund's first investment will be to buy and preserve a 4-unit housing structure in Madison. The fund was launched last summer by a group of government, financial, and philanthropic leaders. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Our daily show, This is Nashville, recently held its first ever stand-up special. Nashville-based comedians Rhonda Sweat and Marcus Lustig performed in Nashville Public Radio's Sonic Cathedral. And after their sets, they sat down with host Khalil Ekulona for a conversation about how they approach tough topics and what they explore through their comedy in an age where there is regular pressure to come up with social media content. Let's take a listen.
So great to have you both here. All right, I do want to talk a little bit about the craft of stand-up comedy. It has grown a lot, particularly in the last 15 years, a lot of people are emerging. You guys yourselves have gotten into the craft over this period of time. And I want to talk a little bit about the cancel culture and comedy. We had a lot of people, a lot of old-time veteran comedians had some issues with cancel culture in comedy, feeling like it inhibited them from really being able to express and perform what they wanted. And then we had a lot of folks who were kind of making a change and taking their audience's feelings into consideration when they're developing and performing and sharing this material. Where do you all stand on that idea of comedy can sometimes, some people believe comedy can take things too far. Some people believe that comedy is best left to itself.
Nice. Going to start with a nice apolitical softball here.
I think you can say anything that you want to say on stage. You have to be good enough to say it, though. And I think a lot of comedians think that they're good enough to relay whatever that message is. And then on the second point is people can feel you. They can feel if you love them. You can be talking about, gay or transgender, things like of that nature, but they can feel if you hate them. People can feel that. And so I think that's the difference between those that did get canceled and those that didn't, is that heart. They miss the fact that people can actually feel that energy.
I agree with Rhonda in terms of like being funny or not. All the time you hear comics say a joke that offends people or that people just don't laugh at, and they're like, oh, you guys can't handle a joke about X topic? Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, dude, the guy before you just made everyone laugh with a joke about that topic. You should just get better at comedy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Also, the whole canceled thing, I mean, like, the thing is that the people who are quote-unquote canceled have built, like, billion-dollar businesses off of being canceled. So I don't even know what that term really means if, in fact, you've, like, sustained your entire brand and following around saying those exact things. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think on all sides across the political spectrum, you just have to be wary of a comedy show that tips into political rally. You want to make people laugh and not like cheer and clap along with you. At least for me, Yeah. But I agree with Rhonda. Like you can say whatever you want, and then people are allowed to react however they want. Like that's always been the case,
How do you both approach like very, very touchy and tricky subjects? Sometimes there's people who come on stage and they're like, oh, it's a little bit too soon. I remember a couple weeks ago, Dave Chappelle hosted Saturday Night Live, and I watched his opening monologue. And I mean, LA was still on fire. And he had jokes about it. Some people kind of approach it like, ooh, that's a little bit too soon because it's sensitive. How do you all approach sensitive topics that someone, if you craft an unfunny joke or perform it in an unfunny manner, someone may take offense at, but you still think there's something in there where humor can be of benefit?
I would say it still comes down to skill, right? The reason he could get that over and people still laughed, he's been doing it 20 years. So he knew how to craft a joke to where it was tasteful enough and still funny and kind of lighten the mood of the tragedy that's going on. And so if you don't have that skill, don't do it. You can definitely try it at an open mic or around your fans. Your fan base will give you a little leeway, I think. But people that don't know you, they're like, what? Oh my God, we just had a school shooting. Why are you talking about that? But, so it just kind of depends on, the fan base and that skill. You have to know where you are as a comedian. I'm in this for 3 years. I'm not finna go out here and just start talking about, the plane crash from yesterday. I'm just not skilled enough to do that. And you have to know that from where you are.
I also think it's just like, does it begin with you have something to say? Or does it begin with like, you feel pressure to have a take on this thing? And like, I think the feeling pressure to have a take on this thing, I think that's an issue personally beyond comedy. Like, I think we just live in a time where everyone's supposed to have censoring myself, a gosh darn opinion about everything. Right. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. And like personally, my opinion is like, and I know this is ironic because I'm talking into a microphone on the radio right now, but we should all just maybe shut up for a while. Is how I feel.
I agree.
And so like that's what I would get on stage and say. I think it's like if you have something to say about that thing, great. But like this pressure to like maybe get on stage so that you can turn it into a clip and make content out of it is just pretty offensive typically to whatever the topic is, you know?
Well, I'm thinking about comedians in the past. George Carlin, Richard Pryor. I've been listening to a lot of them in the car these days. And it's interesting what you said, Marcus, about people just kind of looking to have a take for a clip. These are comedians who had messages in their work, who really looked at society and the world and in a hilarious, genius manner, really held up a mirror so we could look at ourselves. How many, one, is that the approach you both like to take a little bit or you would like to aspire to? And how many folks in the comedy scene do you truly see doing something like that as opposed to just making content clips for clicks?
Well, I think there's a lot of awesome comedy that isn't either of those things, like that isn't being George Carlin, but also isn't just making content. Like, I think there's room to just be irreverent and silly, and that's really of value as well. For me, I don't really aspire. Like, if I talk about something political, it's just because I've been thinking about that. Normally, I try to turn the joke back on me. You know what I mean? I feel like that's a way to often bring people into what you're saying. If I'm making, if I can make fun of myself through the point that I'm trying to make, it kind of opens the door. I'm not threatening anybody with what I'm saying. I've heard, and also just like a joke is kind of a deal where it's like, I make you laugh and you have to listen to what I think, so that's why what Rhonda was saying about you have to hold up the other part of the deal, which is, this is funny. You can't just be like, you got to listen to what I have to say.
It's not my yeah, Rhonda.
So I think comedy is basically it's your unique style, whatever it is, and as you grow, it grows with you. So I really don't know where it's gonna take me. As a Black female, for those that didn't know, listening, obviously there's some things that have happened, over the course of the last few months that would kind of trigger me to think about some things and want to say some things. And it's a little political, right? So it takes me there because that's where my life is at the moment. And so, yeah, you might have a message sometimes, but I really enjoy being silly, too. And so I think it just depends. Your comedy should grow as you grow. It should change as you change. Because a part of it's just really you expressing yourself to many others and trying to find where you all relate.
You can check out the full This Is Nashville stand-up episode in the show's podcast feed, wherever you listen. And we do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday, so subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you like this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashvillager newsletter, too. You'll get perspective from more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at WPLN.org/Nashvillager. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.